All right. Well, welcome back to our podcast. This is episode 4 of Magnify the Middle podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Jeff. Say hi, Jeff.
Hey,
And we're joined today by our special guest, Bridget Woitas, who is our talent acquisition director here at our company. So, Bridget, we asked you on here today because Jeff and I were talking. It really seems like in a lot of our circles, a lot of our business owners that we're talking to and other managers continue to tell us the story about how they've recently hired someone and they're just not working out. So they went through the whole process, they thought they've selected the right candidate, and lo and behold, 6 months, a year later, they're having to start all over again. So it seems to be a trend that's going on. I don't know if you guys have noticed that as well. Just in LinkedIn, as you're browsing around, there's just a lot of rehiring that's happening. So I asked you to come here today, just kind of give us a little bit of insight as to why that might be happening and what are some of your interview techniques that you use to try to find the best candidate. So before we dive in, I always like to ask a fun question of everybody. And my question today is, what's the most memorable thing that you remember from an interview with somebody? Somebody did something memorable, they said something funny or odd, or just something weird or quirky that's happened.
Yeah, I'll go first. So we were interviewing a candidate in our office, and this individual was struggling to come up with an answer for something. And I was sitting there giving that individual time to think, and they eventually just like could not think of the answer. They put their head physically down on the table like this to think through what they wanted to say. And it was one of the most awkward
A little
moments I have ever had interviewing someone as they rested their head on the table to think about their answer.
That's a
they
good
just
one.
gave up completely.
Yeah, we moved on to the next question pretty quickly.
I would say so too.
Yeah.
I think for me, I had a candidate once that he had been in the same role for it was like 20 or 30 years. He was kind of like institutionalized, and his current company actually encouraged him to come interview with us, which was a little awkward. And he was very self-deprecating all the way through the interview. He's like, "Well, you're probably not going to hire me, but I came today anyway." And it was just the most awkward interview ever because he was not very confident. But at the same time, he was endearing and you wanted to pull for him, but he just didn't quite have the qualifications. That was the one that sticks out to me.
Yeah. I think for me, this isn't a major deal, but it told me a lot about what this person would be like if we hired them. They answered a question, and for some reason, they just kept talking and kept answering the question, and they started divulging personal information about their boss. And then once they realized they just were so off course, they couldn't stop, and then just kept unraveling, and they were telling us just some like no things nobody would want to know, and this was about their
Did you
boss.
did you just go,
Yeah, I was like, I don't. If we're a small enough town, we should probably, yeah, like,
we played soccer together with their kids?
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought, I don't think this is going to work out for us. So yeah, I think that was the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me in an interview. So Bridget, from your perspective, what are some tips? What are some techniques that you can teach other managers out there as they're interviewing to try to select that qualified candidate that's going to be here, past 6 months to a year?
Yeah. So I think the first thing when you're considering the position and who you're looking for is you have to be really certain on what are the key attributes you need in that position. Like, what are the traits, what are the skills that are most important to that job? And then I always recommend building your interview around that, right? Because you want to drill down to figure out if they have the capability to do it, if they don't have the experience, and just the general skill set to do it. So you always hear the phrase, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So I like to build questions around those traits, seeing how they handled it in the past, to see if that's comparable to how we ideally would like it handled in our, I guess, in your business line. And so that's called behavior-based interview questions. So
Okay.
those are the tell me about a time you had to deal with a tricky customer and how did you work through it? Or It's all those situational based questions. So that's always my number one tip is make sure to build in some questions around those really important key attributes for your job.
Do you have a favorite interview question?
Well, I tend to always find myself asking, tell me about a time you had to work with an angry or demanding or difficult individual, and how did you handle it? And there's always a laugh, and they're like, well, every single day. And I'm like, perfect. Give me one example of that. And it's really interesting to hear how people work through that, whether they take it on themselves to resolve it, or if they're conflict avoidant, you see them like bringing in their manager super soon, or maybe they don't handle it very well and they give a little, I guess, sass back to an individual. So it's really interesting to hear like how they approach it. And then you think about, okay, is this how at our company, is that how we would want someone to handle a customer or a client? So that's one of my favorite ones to ask about, because I feel like customer service is such an important part of so many roles.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true, even if it's not a customer facing role per se, but just how they're going to interact with maybe teammates or coworkers or peers as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Jeff, do you have one?
Yeah, I think the question I like is, if I told you you had to count all the windows in New York City, what would you do?
Really?
Yes. And I like it for technical interviews because I'm just trying to understand how they think. Do they have a logical mind? Is it reasonable? Or do they even try to solve it? I've had a couple of people, they get flustered and they give up. Because when we ask the question, we'll just sit there and we'll just be silent and wait and let them answer and be patient. And some people they're just like, it's hard in an interview setting, but others, it's interesting. You can start to see how their wheels turn. Do they approach it logically, or do they do something kind of off the wall or weird? So I don't know. It's just an interesting way to get to understand how somebody's mind might approach solving a problem.
I used to, when I was a part of a panel interview, and it was always with this one particular person, and same approach. They would ask, not related at all, but if you were on a football team, what position would you be in? And I think part of it was to just like loosen them up a little bit and get them laughing and like feel comfortable, in which I feel people probably do perform better and you get to know them better in an interview. But also for that same reason Jeff mentioned, okay, so they think through, oh, well, actually, I would like to be the quarterback because I like coordinating things and being in charge, or I'm the defense. I don't know. So you get to see a little bit of their thought process, assuming they know a little bit about football.
Yeah. I was just going to say, kind of back on the behavioral interview part, Bridget, I feel like that was kind of a game changer for me once I learned about that. And actually sitting in other interviews, when I see people not using it, I feel like the interview tends to not go well. And sometimes people will ask almost too direct of a question. They'll say something like, well, at our company, we do XYZ. Do you think you could do XYZ? And then the candidate's going to go, yeah, I'm awesome at XYZ. You know what I mean? I've seen that time and time again. Versus
like they're asking leading questions.
Yeah. They kind of
spoon feeding it.
Yeah, and then you don't really get to know the person or what they've done.
Yeah. So along those lines, Bridget, if you have somebody that maybe they're still a little bit nervous and they're not really expanding upon their questions, what are some ways you can continue drawing out those behavioral interview answers from them and their questions?
Yeah, so I think, well, the key is you have to listen to them and hear what they're saying, and then having drill down questions based on what they're saying. So going back to my example, how would you handle a tough customer? If someone just said, well, I listened to them and then I try to resolve it and hopefully we figure it out, I'd be like, okay, well, walk me through specifically that scenario. Like, what was the customer saying to you? How did you respond? And get them to like get into the specifics. And most people can, but if they really truly have an inability to articulate, I guess that's maybe a red flag if you're looking for like strong communication skills or someone who can take complex information and communicate it in a way that's simple to understand. So Jeff, working in IT, I feel like that's a skill you have to have because you know all the very technical knowledge, but when you're working with anyone not in your area, you have to explain it in an easy way. So that might be a concern, or just their inability to go in detail, right? So if it's a role that requires a lot of specifics, but they can't even do that, show that they can do that, that would be a red flag. So it's always diving deeper questions, but you have to hear what they're saying. And I think asking questions that relate to what they have said. But you can even have a few of those prepared in advance, okay, so ask them what specifically they said to the customer. What did they have a recommendation they had? Or, you can kind of have those in advance just to be prepared too.
So when you're interviewing, are you doing most of the talking or are they doing most of the talking?
They should do most of the talking. I feel like this is probably one of my other big tips is try to aim if you're the interviewer, aim for like 80-20 or 90-10. So you're speaking 10 to 20% of the time, and the candidate should be speaking really 80 to 90% of the time. And I think that's a common error for people, interviewers fall into, because you're excited, right? You want to just tell them about the opportunity or sell your company, but really you should let them do most of the talking.
So Bridget, what if you get somebody that's kind of nervous, right? And they're just shy or they haven't done it much before, especially I think this is more common with younger people, maybe when you're interviewing an intern. Like, do you have some good tips to help to get them to start flowing and not feel so stiff?
Yeah, I try to, I might go a little, not like off script, but try to personalize it a little bit, maybe respond myself just to like find a relatable item, right? I feel like we all try to relate with people, and that might make you feel a little bit more open, or try to insert a little humor here and there, and just humanize it, connect with them and make it feel less like a robotic process and like, hey, we're just having a conversation, right? So I do feel like, I know there's different interviewing techniques. You can be super like rigid and almost like instill fear, but I like to go on the other end and try to make it feel very personable and warm and welcoming. And I think that's trying to reflect our culture as well. But I guess that would be the tactic or techniques I would use.
Mm-hmm. So Jeff and I tend to interview a lot of technical, people for our roles, and they do tend to be more direct and to the point. How do you continue to get them to draw out, what if they're just give you a couple word answer and they're done? Like, how do you get them to keep talking?
Well, I actually think sometimes doing less is more. So pause and just embrace a little bit of the awkward silence. It's actually this is a good technique when you're trying to brainstorm in groups too. I think they say allow like 5 to 7 seconds of silence, and someone will feel awkward enough that they'll speak up, and it'll probably be the candidate, right? And so they might feel like they need to expand because maybe they're thinking, oh, they're not responding. Did I not give enough information? Okay, I'll keep going. So I think there's a lot of power in like pausing and silence. And so it's against our like natural instincts to do that, but I think it can be very powerful. So that's one technique. And then probably just going back to those drill down questions, right? Just have some follow-up questions, some specifics. And probably with technical people, they want to show off their knowledge, right? And so try to learn some of the lingo, some of their terms, and then see if they'll just, get in their sweet spot, their comfort zone, and just keep going then.
Yeah, that's interesting. You really have to fight your natural tendency to feel that awkwardness. And I can see what you're saying. If they're trying to do the same thing and they're not going to be able to come up with a scripted response that they might have ready for that, and then you're really going to understand, what their natural instincts are.
Yeah. I actually just had that happen in an interview. I was asking an individual why they were looking for a new job, and great canned response, right? And then I didn't respond right away. I just gave it a couple seconds, and then they felt the need to divulge more information, and it led to like a little bit more of the truth behind it, some company culture issues, and then I learned to find out there were some attendance issues on their end. And I was like, okay, so it wasn't just this. And so that's why, I think seriously, just giving yourself a second or two to just pause and digest it, you might find they open up a little bit more.
Yeah. So, that's actually that's a good segue into how do you know if you might be hiring the wrong person or interviewing the wrong person? What are some of those red flags that we should be looking out for?
Yeah, I think one of the it's a very simple technique, but something I think is very powerful is they call it the like greeter check. So the individual who is sometimes the front-facing person when a candidate comes to your office or whatever it may be, they might greet the individual, escort them up to the interview. Um, don't be shy about asking about their feedback. Did the candidate treat them with respect? Did they talk to them? How was that interaction? Because I think that can actually tell you a lot about a person, because they shouldn't be just coming to impress the interviewers. They should be respectful of everyone they're meeting along the way. So kind of that the greeter, your receptionist, your director of first impressions, whatever you call that position in your firm, get their take on how their interaction was with them. So that's one, because I think that just tells you a little bit about the culture fit within your firm and how they treat others. And then I think a few things in the actual interview that you can look for as red flags. Personally, I never like when someone comes unprepared, like they don't know anything about your company, they don't even know much about the position. Yeah, maybe they want a job, but do they want this job? Like you want someone who's equally interested in your position as you are in them. And so not being prepared is a red flag in my mind.
Yeah, we're actually a nonprofit that I'm working with interviewing for a position, and somebody emailed yesterday and said, "Is this position still available? If so, can you tell me something about your organization and the area that it's in?"
Yeah.
Which that's so easy to find out online. Do some homework.
I know. And I feel like it's part of it is like there's a lot of job boards out there that will push opportunities to people and say invite you to apply. And so if they just like click the button like apply, that could be part of the reason, but that doesn't reflect well, I don't think on them.
Right.
It's like you should know what company you're applying to and general idea about the job.
In terms of red flags, like I think we used to think of people with short tenure at organizations as a red flag, but I think more recently with some of the job changes and everyone's been in flux, do you still feel like that's a red flag, or do you feel like you can't rely on that anymore?
That's a good question.
I think it's something to be aware of and mindful of, but I think you need to find out more context to it. So especially with the pandemic, I see a lot more turnover in candidates because there's just financial and economic reasons that companies were laying off people that are out of their control. And so I don't consider that a red flag for that reason. So I'm seeing a lot more because of pandemic related reasons. We're obviously going into a recession, so there are a lot of layoffs happening. But also one of the last, trainings I went through, they did say there's a shift in generational differences, that the average tenure is somewhere around like 1.5 to 2 years now.
Wow.
Which most, people will say, wow, that's a red flag. They're switching jobs every 2 years, but it's kind of becoming the way of the world. So I think it's good to understand why. Why did they leave after 2 years?
So you might really have to press into that and not accept the surface answer.
Yeah. Some it might be for money, some it might be growth opportunities. And I don't think that's always a bad thing. You just have to know, like, okay, that's going to be a challenge we'll face, right? And so if it's someone who wants growth, what does growth look like in your firm and how do you articulate that and then come through on those promises so that you're not one of those 1.5 year companies on their resume.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. I heard you say that in an interview this week. A lot of times candidates will give a lot of the similar answers as to why they're looking for opportunities. And it always sounds like a great candidate. I want more growth opportunities. I want a company that aligns with my values. And it was very clear to me that you've heard those answers a lot. And I believe the way that you ask the question is growth means a lot of things to different people. Explain to me what it means to you. And I could just picture in my mind how you might get a wide variety of answers to that would really tell you, were they really in a position where they did want to get promoted and the company just was a certain size, they just didn't have the opportunity? Or was it their eyes were a little bit bigger than their skill set? Yeah. So tell me about how that's been effective for you.
Yeah, and I feel like this was I kind of learned through trial and error asking this. I didn't always drill down on that. But I just it means different things to different people, and some areas, some departments or some companies might be scared by someone who wants growth, but it's like, well, what about growth though? You like if it's someone who wants to climb the corporate ladder and wants to be into leadership, yeah, maybe that's understandable if you don't have a lot of hierarchy and options. But what if it's someone who just really wants to like grow in the industry and they want to grow their technical expertise, and that's something you can support. So I feel like it it made me be able to better present candidates and understand them, and then understand like where they could be a fit or not, versus just a very canned looking for growth. I don't know. It was too vague to me, and I needed to to dive in, and
Yeah.
because you see too much, like you see turnover happen if you don't understand like what are their career interests and aspirations.
Yeah, and I've also seen on that question as I drill into candidates why they left, and then you ask another question and another question. Once you start going a couple layers deep, sometimes they will bring out some of those red flags when they start to talk very poorly about their manager, or they talk very poorly about the company they work for. These things might be true, but the way that they reflect upon them is going to tell us something about this individual, and whether they'd be a good cultural fit for us or not.
It's that 5 whys thing, right, Elizabeth?
Yes, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I love that technique. So what are some of your pet peeves, either one of
Mm.
you, when you're interviewing?
I'll go. And
Okay.
I don't know if this, I want your opinion on this because I don't know if this is just me being weird or what. I don't like it when the candidate tries to take control of the interview.
Really?
Yeah, I've had that
That's a
happen.
technique.
I've had that a couple times where I'm like, I have my questions, I'm ready to go. And it's like, it's almost like it feels like a wrestling match. It's like where they're trying to take control of the interview. And, it just, I don't know. I just feel this like tension that it's like, no, I'll give you, I explained at the beginning, like you'll have time to ask questions at the end, but we're going to go through my agenda first. We'll get to yours. You have a chance, but while it's my turn, it's my turn. I don't know. Is that weird, Bridget, or?
That bugs me too. I would
Okay.
would put that
Okay.
probably
All
on my
right.
top five as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it just throws you off, and then
Yeah.
you don't feel like maybe you got what you needed out of that interview. And
Yeah.
I mean, it could be indicative of how they work too in a team. You know, are they going to be collaborative? Or are they going to want to lead things, whether that's good or bad? Like, are they going to steer the ship in the right way? I don't know. So that bugs me as well. That would
But
be a
do you
pet
guys get
peeve.
the sense that candidates that are doing that are trying to showcase their leadership skills? Like, I can lead this interview, or do you think they're just naturally have to be in control?
Probably a little bit of both, and maybe it could even be like a social thing, right? Like they're a very social person, and so they're
Mm.
just very much like to control the conversation, I guess. So it could be a combination of that, or it's maybe those a little bit of a type A type of personality, I guess, might
Hmm.
be coming out.
So that's, for those that don't know, that's a specific reference to something Velmark uses called the culture
Mm.
index, meaning that person tends to be more uh, self-directed. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah. So is that your pet peeve as well, Bridget, or you have others on your list?
I'd say another one on my list is when a candidate will be talking to me throughout the interview, and then I ask them a question. They're like, well, if I'm being honest, and then
Oh,
proceeds to say something like, so were you not being honest like the first 10 minutes of this interview? Or what's going on
Really? You
here?
don't feel
So
like it's just a phrase? You
it
don't
is a
feel like it's just a
phrase.
phrase? Yeah.
It is a phrase. I know it's just like a common phrase, but I think they should just cut that from their vocabulary, because what they should be telling me this whole time is being honest. I think what they're actually trying to say is like in full transparency, like I'm kind of talking to you person to person in confidence. I think that's what they're trying to reflect. I just
yeah,
don't like how that phrase comes off, because it almost insinuates you're being dishonest the rest of the
yeah,
time.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I have two. One is when they have no questions. You get to the end of the interview.
Yeah.
Everybody does this when they interview, so you should be ready for it. So, what questions do you have for me? And they say, I can't really think of any. That's a pet peeve for me. Like at
Hmm.
least think of one. Have something prepared. There's no way we covered everything in this interview.
What's your favorite TV show? What's your favorite fruit? Something. Give me
Yeah, what do you
something.
do for fun? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And my second one is when people have read tips and highlights on interviewing, and they love to turn any question that has like, tell me something that people say you could improve upon, and they turn that around to be, well, something that's actually very complimentary. People
I
say I'm
just
too
work too
nice.
hard.
I work
I work
so
too hard.
hard.
I work too
Yeah,
hard.
I try to help everybody, and so I don't think about myself enough. And it's like, all right, I know what you're
Oh,
doing. Give me a real
okay.
answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
get
and
what they're
that would
saying.
be a red flag, right? Your inability to just like identify a weakness or just something, a growth area for you.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I think so. So, Bridget, if you would share with us, have you made any hiring mistakes that you've learned from?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, don't
There's
flip. You
a,
can't flip this around either. You
Yeah,
can't
you
flip this
can't
around.
say, I hired too many good people.
well, just all of my hires always work out. No, there's one that stands out. Yes, I've had a handful. I mean, I'm human. I make mistakes, but there's one in particular that stands out, and I think it really talks to like the stress you can be under when you're running a team and you're short staffed and what you'll do in desperate times. So,
Oh, oh.
which is never just not the way to go. Try to avoid it. But we hired someone a little out of desperation. It was a friend of someone leading the area and was kind of a favor. And this person needed to get like back into the workforce. And so we had a need. So we gave this person a shot. And I mean, great, like it's a great person, but not a good fit for the role. And it ended up just like being a really big challenge as a manager
Mm.
to lead that person. They weren't performing at their job. The rest of the team was getting frustrated because they felt they had to pick up the slack. And then, they were always gone on vacation, it felt like. And so just a lot of things happened. And it was really tricky because in most situations, you'd probably like performance plan, work with them and maybe they're not a good fit. You find a way to exit, but it was tough because it was a friend of the person leading the area. So it was like, what do
Ugh,
you do? I'm in a rock and a hard
that's
place.
tough.
Eventually it worked itself out and the person moved on. But it left a lot of ripple effects on our team. There's a lot of
Mm.
work that had to be done. So
Mm.
um, it was a big mistake and we felt it for many months
I,
after the
I
person even
feel
left our organization.
I feel like that happens a lot, Bridget. Like we get in these situations, we're patient, we can't find somebody, we just feel it like we're at the end of our rope and we just take anybody, and then it actually causes even more problems. Like,
Yeah.
are there any like just warning signs or things that people tell themselves or rationalizations they make that you now kind of think of as like trigger words, like, uh-oh, this team could be in trouble because they're not being patient or they're just taking whoever. I mean, I guess at some point you need to get somebody to do some work in some situations, but I've made that mistake too, and every time I've regretted it.
Yeah. And I think I can only like just sharing my personal experience and just like patience will pay off. I know it will be hard. I think in the meantime, they probably have to find creative ways to reward your team and make sure they're feeling appreciated, right, while we get
Mhm.
through it. But it's not going to help anyone to hire the wrong person. I mean, then they're training the wrong person. You're spending time and money on this individual and they'll turn around. And I think they say turnover costs are like at least a third of a person's salary. And
Mhm.
so it's just not worth it from any way you look at it. So I guess it's probably just knowing the manager, the hiring manager, and if you see them start to get way lax on things they were very concerned about, there are areas where I think it is important
Oh,
to be flexible. But if they're just like, well, I don't care, I guess maybe that's fine, and they just loosen up
whereas
everything.
I actually think that's a really good sign, right? If the manager used to care about something and then all of a sudden they're letting their standards slip with their
Yeah.
applicants, that's probably a red flag.
Right.
Or hopefully others around them, either the HR person or maybe other team members, say, "Hey, boss, like remember a month ago when you said that you would never take that? What are we doing?"
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
I I always look for the phrase when I hear a hiring manager say, well, we just need to get somebody in here. That's always my red flag of we need to really filter these resumes because they're likely to just hire the next person that's available. And yeah, like you said, it's a slow process to have to redo this again in a very expensive process that really wears all the staff down as you go because they're the ones training these employees. And yeah, it's difficult. Well, Bridget, I think that's some great intel to get our managers rolling on how to really use discernment and patience as they go through this process and really be in tuned. I heard you say a lot of things about listening to what they're saying. You're cued into their nonverbal communication and just filtering through to how this person's really going to fit and whether they're going to be a good culture fit. Anything else before we sign off here that you want to make sure as a key takeaway for our managers on selecting the right fit?
Yeah, I would say I have lots of tips, but one other one is be intentional, I guess, about who you involve in your interview process and make sure it's not too many people, because I think there can be a problem of too many cooks in the kitchen and then you have to navigate all the different opinions, but make sure it's people who know what it takes to be successful in your team, successful in this role. I think it's good to involve someone who has really strong gut intuition. They might pick up on some things that maybe others might. So I'd say just be intentional about who you have involved and then keep it consistent with that position, who is involved in the process, so that it's kind of a fair evaluation ground, I guess, for the candidates.
Do you have a specific number, like, I don't know, or a range, like
number of people to involve?
Yeah. I feel like sometimes I get too many people involved.
Yeah. I mean, it's likely, I would say, somewhere between 3 to 5 people, and I know it depends on the position. I have heard, though, in terms of like how many interviews there should be, that the value that you're going to gain after 4 interviews starts to diminish.
4?
So after 4, they say do not go over 4 because the value you're adding is actually like diminishing, right?
Does that include the HR screen, or is that after they've been HR screened with the team?
No, including the
4?
HR screen. So, if you do an HR screen, video call, on-site, after that, and I mean, even in the market we're in right now, too many interviews, you're going to lose candidates.
Oh, yes. We had that issue a lot this year.
Yeah.
We took too long because too many people wanted to meet with them, and we lost.
Mm-hmm. So it's a healthy balance because you have to get the right people involved. You want to make sure they're a good fit. You don't want to hire the wrong person, but at the same time, you can't have 16 interviews. Like, that's not.
So does that just mean that organization needs to be better organized in that case and have a little bit more better planning up front, as opposed to, is that an indication of what's going on when you start to have too many interviews?
Yeah, or just you might see it where they like someone, but maybe they're not 100% sure. So let's get this one more person's opinion, and I think that's where indecisiveness can happen. But hopefully being more effective in your first few interviews, like doing behavior-based interview questions and getting the right people, hopefully that can allow a little bit of less indecisiveness.
Yeah, Jeff, remember, we're being interviewed too by the candidates, and we've gotten that feedback from candidates of, I've been back this is now my 4th interview. You're asking me to come back in to meet with other people. And they've, sometimes telling the truth is hard, or hearing the truth is hard. And they've said, this other company, they're ready. They've made their decision. I feel more comfortable over there. They're more decisive. That's a hard truth for us to swallow, but I understand it.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you're dating, right? And the person's not sure about you. It's like, well, if you don't like me, it's fine.
Yes, that's exactly what it's like. Yeah. Well, that's a good point to stop. Bridget, thank you so much for being on here. I think these were some great insight to share with our managers.
No problem. Thank you for having me.